AM 1460, the new WXBR. Mike Paiva here with you on this Thursday morning. Thank you very much for joining us. And joining us on the line right now is a man making his return to the program. Last time we talked with this gentleman was last month, and he was telling us about his book Festivus, a holiday for the rest of us. And when we last talked to Allen Salkin, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Allen, but in passing, I haven't even started yet. In passing, you mentioned about the Food Network, and correct me if I'm wrong, you weren't a fan of the direction that the network is moving in by opting for more competition reality type shows. Am I correct in that assumption?
It's a little more subtle than that. I mean, everyone complains at the Food Network. The book is called From Scratch Inside the Food Network, and everybody complains that the Food Network has too much competition. You know, they come on every night and it's people yelling at each other, and it lacks the kind of good old-fashioned spirit of Sarah Moulton and the old cooking shows. Mm-hmm. I don't actually have a problem with the competition shows so much as I have a problem with these fake reality shows. What else you see when you turn on every night is a bunch of sort of evil-hearted restaurant consultant types, most of whom look like they may come from the worlds of organized crime, installing hidden cameras in people's restaurants. And it's like 10 different shows, it seems like, with this theme, and spying on the employees who, do things like, lick the cream cheese before putting it out or whatever. And it just strikes me as fake and just so far removed from the true spirit of food and restaurants that put the network on the map.
Right, now, let's go back to the beginning, Alan. And we're speaking with Allen Salkin, author of From Scratch, Inside the Food Network, Big Personalities, High Drama, The Extraordinary Behind-the-Scenes Story. Let's go back to the beginning, and my earliest memories of the Food Network include the original Iron Chef, Yan Can Cook, and a local guy by the name of Emeril Lagasse. But before the network even existed, there was really nothing for cooking shows besides, of course, Julia Child.
Right.
Why did no one believe that a television channel dedicated to cooking wouldn't work?
Because, most of those shows were produced out of the Boston Public Television Channel, and including Julia's, and sent around the world. And that was the sort of real cauldron of food TV. And it was on the weekend mornings, generally, and that was thought to be it. Even PBS, which was approached by numerous producers, said, no, we're the channel of the news hour and Nova, and, we have quite enough cooking, thank you. There was a sort of snobbish attitude. The guys who hatched this channel, which was started in 1993, were some kind of small-time, mostly cable television operators in Providence, Rhode Island, running Colony Cable, which was owned by the Providence Journal, if you want some inside info. And, at that time, we were going from what was 35 cable networks into the 500-channel universe. Of course, now we're in the 5 gajillion channel universe with the internet and everything.
Of course.
And they were just trying stuff out. In fact, at first they tried an idea that they never put on the air for a pet channel. They just were looking for something that they could sell advertisers on. And, of course, the problem with pets is that dogs do not make their own purchase decisions about cars and cruise vacations, so advertisers aren't really interested.
And they're also not very good actors.
They're not. Well, some of them are. There was like 5 different Lassies, right, to do whatever. But so anyway, the guy they first hired to start the Food Network was named Reese Schonfeld, and he happened to be the guy that was the president who launched CNN, also under Ted Turner. Reese was not a food guy. In fact, Reese had his kitchen removed from his apartment in New York with his wife.
He had his kitchen removed.
Yes, they were great New Yorkers who needed space, and instead of having a kitchen, they just had a cabinet with dog food and a coffee maker, speaking of dogs. So, and when Reese told his wife he was going to start this, be the president of this channel, she told him it was the worst idea she'd ever heard. It was just nobody thought that anybody would want to watch chefs in prime time. That's the bottom line. It had never been tried, and everybody thought it was a stupid idea. And in fact, for years, the network lost money, had terrible struggle getting viewers, and was proving the original investors who were very skittish, and the people who said no, they were proving them right because the channel wasn't very good.
So
Now,
what?
go ahead. But just to talk about the people you saw in the early days, Emerald, who does come out of Fall River, of course, and Yan Can Cook. They were just running reruns of Yan's show. They were looking for content, so they bought old Julia Child episodes, old Yan episodes, old Diani Lucas, whatever they could throw on the air. They tried, and Emerald's first show was called How to Boil Water. And at that time, he was already a well-recognized, decorated chef who was cooking in New Orleans, reinventing Cajun food and Creole food. But the show, the president just wanted to have a show in which divorced men could be taught, how to cook for themselves. And so on his first episode, Emerald literally said, put water in pot, turn on stove.
It's funny.
He did move on to such complicated dishes as grilled cheese sandwiches, which, as you know, can be very complicated.
Very difficult, yes.
If you want to make the cheese melt without burning the bread, it's a little challenging. Got to use a lot of oil. And it wasn't really until Emerald's third show. He did a show called Emerald and Friends, which was no good. And then he did Essence of Emerald, where he's finally allowed to cook his own recipes, and that was good. And then, of course, in 1997. Emerald Live came along with the live band and the studio audience, and that was where he and the network really started cooking.
Was that
sorry, I might keep interrupting you, but you also mentioned Iron Chef, and that, the story of Iron Chef, which I tell in the book, is very interesting, how that weird, show with screaming Japanese people dubbed and got on the air is an amazing story.
That was really one of my favorite shows in the very beginning. We'll get back to that later. What was the tipping point for the network? Was it Emerald? Was it Emerald Live that really started to get the ball rolling for the network?
Yes. That was the first thing they had that was anything close to a hit. All of a sudden people were writing articles about the Food Network. There was a really smart marketing woman at the network named Heidi Diamond who started identifying a trend called chunks, which was chef hunks, and Emerald was sort of, at that time, he was kind of young and kind of slender and, had all his charisma, and it was this thing that nobody had seen before. He was, when you watch those early Emerald Lives, people were so excited about a grown man throwing garlic on something. They were whooping it up because it was like this liberating thing. I equate it to music. The first time in the 50s, people saw Elvis move his hips. It was like this whole new way of living that was being represented by this music and the movement. And it was the same thing. People, Americans, it's hard to remember now when we all, have kale and shallots in our fridge, that people were afraid of cooking and they had lost their way for the most part. And this guy was bringing some jive back to it and exciting people. And
he had a catchphrase. You can't beat that.
Yeah, exactly. You can't. What was it? You can't buy that for $1. And, the catchphrase, BAM, I tell the story in the book, the way that started was the network was filming like 6 to 7 episodes of a show a day.
Wow.
It was back-to-back. There was a no-stopping rule. And Emerald would show up high as a kite on espresso. And the camera guys were, a lot of them, moonlighting because Reese knew them from the news business. So they were working off the books a second shift and falling asleep while taping during these long days. So Emerald started shouting "Bam!" just to keep the camera guys alive and keep them on their toes.
Wow. We're speaking with Allen Salkin, author of From Scratch, Inside the Food Network, Big Personalities, High Drama, the extraordinary behind-the-scenes story. Now, I read somewhere that Emerald didn't want Rachel Ray on the network. Yeah. Is that true, and what was the reasoning behind that?
Emerald thought this was a channel for chefs. It was a channel of food instruction. And, for people like him who came from this long tradition of apprenticeship and restaurant cooking to teach the rest of the world the sort of wonderful ways of the kitchen. All of a sudden, this 5'0" girl shows up, straight from upstate New York, telling people that they should, it's okay to shop in the Price Chopper or the cheap local market, to use, pre-cut vegetables sometimes. And, Rachel herself, when she first went into her first meeting at Food Network, said she thought they had a mistake, that this was a network of champagne and she was beer from a bottle. And so Emerald protested that this was the wrong direction for the network.
Who made the choice to finally bring Rachel Ray in?
What happened was Rachel, who people think is a sunny, whatever she is, she's an incredible hard worker, and she actually comes from a restaurant family. Originally, they owned restaurants in Cape Cod, and then in upstate New York, her mom was managing Howard Johnson's, and Rachel worked her ass off, if I can say ass on
Sure can.
show, ass. She'd wear those brown and orange Howard Johnson unbreathable polyester uniforms in the summer, and so anyway, she worked her ass off, and then she moved to the city, New York City, and got a job at a gourmet food place. She endured a couple horrible muggings. Her foot was broken. She gave up. She moved back upstate with her mother, and eventually started doing little demonstrations on the local news of cooking in people's homes. Anyway, there was such demand for her to write a cookbook, she finally found a little publisher. They published it. It was a huge success upstate. She was doing a radio interview, not unlike this one, talking about her book, and this guy named Lou Eckes, who actually has a studio in Western Massachusetts, is this person who, when you're a chef and you want to learn how to perform on TV, you hire Lou. And Lou, tells you how to look in the camera and smile. And Lou just heard Rachel on the radio and said, "This is perfect. This woman knows how to tell a story quickly, seems to know her chops about food. She's charming." And he called this guy he barely knew, Bob Tushman, who was a programming executive at Food Network, and said, "You got to meet this girl." At the same time, Al Roker, the weatherman from the Today Show, had seen Rachel on local TV and asked her to come appear on the Today Show because they were having a big blizzard and none of the people from out of town could get to the network. This all came together. They called Rachel in for a meeting, and they gave her a shot, despite her protestations that they had the wrong girl. This was now around 2000. The network had finally started getting some viewers and was trying to bring more people into the fold. They wanted more personalities who felt maybe like your neighbor, somebody you could be comfortable with. Now, they still hadn't gone full bore with this. Rachel was a sort of experiment.
Mm-hmm.
They tried her out on the Emerald set. They gave her a tryout, and she comes in and she's totally dazed by being on, the Godfather set. And her show really is cooking meals in 30 minutes or less, and she goes to the fridge and she gets everything. The kitchen staff at the network was so used to having to do prep work that they didn't know what to do with themselves. So they kept, normally they'd have to have like 5 different chickens prepared in various states of brownness to slide in and out of the oven. I know I'm so long-winded, but I've been talking about this book for a while. Anyway, they kept preheating Rachel's pan. By the time they said action, one more thing. Rachel had been told by Sarah Moulton, keep smiling no matter what, and the director, Mark Disson, told her, you cannot yell cut no matter what, only we can. You have to keep going. They yell action. Rachel pours olive oil into this pan, which has been preheating for half an hour. Boom! Up goes a big thing of flame. She thinks she's burned down Emeril Lagasse's set, and they're going to fire her. But she decides to keep smiling, pushes the pan aside, and the rest is television history.
Let's continue to talk about the big personalities that you get from the Food Network. My broadcast partner, Peter Zimbor, always a big fan of Rachel Ray. I myself, on the other hand, big fan of Giada De Laurentiis. I've heard you not a big fan of Giada.
I like people who will give me interviews. I'm a journalist,
Mm-hmm.
I think Rachel is a very honest person through and through who, has her faults, definitely likes, taste of the grape now and then, but, was very generous with me, and not just with me, but I think is really who you see on TV. There's not a lot of artifice there. In Giada's case, now, it's important to say, everybody has their favorites, okay? And that's why after 9/11, that when the network was really making itself over, trying in the model of Rachel to find different personalities who would appeal to different constituencies, that's when we got Paula Deen and that whole generation of people, mm-hmm. the Barefoot Contessa and Giada. I think Giada does know what she's talking about, but she's just a very controlled person. And to me, when I watch Giada, she does appeal to me as well because she's sort of like this ideal girlfriend that I always wish I had, who was, built like she was, who could also cook up a storm. It's a perfect mix. But I just, first of all, I don't like that she didn't give me an interview. Secondly, there's something about her that just is not real. And some viewers picked that up from the start. They wondered why the network was starting to hire actresses rather than real chefs.
Very interesting.
But you're allowed to like her.
Thank you very much, Alan. We're speaking with Allen Salkin, author of From Scratch Inside the Food Network. Another big star, and really their last big star, is Guy Fieri. Guy became the next Food Network star back in, 2006, 2007, was it?
Right, 2006.
And he hosts the popular program Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, which is basically on almost every night. What can you tell me about Guy?
Well, Guy's childhood heroes were Evel Knievel and Elvis, and I think Guy, in a funny way, actually is as he appears. He's just a great American showman. He's had his problems. The guy that originally created Triple D, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, David Page, got in some legal dispute with Guy, claimed that Guy was using anti-Semitic remarks and the like, and Guy now travels around with the massive entourage, these 7-foot-tall, hulking football player guys who clear everything out for him. But somehow in his case, he's a guy who makes sense in the middle of a posse. He's a party wherever he shows up. It's also interesting that the network is running that show now later and later into the night. They're trying to have Guy compete with the late night shows at this point, and it does show that in a way, the network, which was minting new stars every month back in the early 2000s, hasn't had a new star since Guy, and they just seem to be leaning harder and harder on their old ideas.
You mentioned Paula Deen earlier on, and we'll talk a little bit about Paula. Paula, of course, as everybody knows, was under fire earlier this year for racist comments that she made, effectively ending her time at the network. Did her departure from the network hurt the company, and do you think Paula Deen will ever make her return to the Food Network?
I do think it hurt the company, but I think, and I don't think she'll be back on Food Network. I think she will be back on television probably, but not on Food Network. This is now a network that is expanding with satellite channels in, Mongolia, Europe, Asia, South Africa. They just can't afford to be associated with racism in any way, and Paula was a loose cannon. This goes back before the racism thing to the diabetes drug deal she made a year earlier, where all of a sudden the queen of butter and sugar, took a few $1 million to endorse a diabetes drug treatment, right, never having announced it until that moment that she was getting this big payday. And, it changed watching her show from being this sort of fun indulgence into being like watching an alcoholic drink themselves to death. It just wasn't as much fun anymore. And what's more fun than that, right? We all love leaving Las Vegas.
Exactly.
So I think it hurt the network, and I think there are many people who still love Paula Deen. She's got a Facebook We Love Paula Deen page with, more than 500,000 fans, and whenever I talk about her or, tweet about her, there's a strong response. So I do think somebody would probably be smart to pick her up, but I don't think, the Food Network is owned by Scripps, a conservative kind of Midwestern Southern company that just is squeamish about, as they should be, about certain things.
Let's talk about something that a lot of people, you don't really see it, and that's the prep work that goes on for each show. There's a lot of prep work that goes on. And now, the people who are doing the cooking and doing the prep work, are they a full-time, or how does that work out? Do they have side jobs? How does it work out for those people?
Mike, you deserve an award.
Why is that?
You've actually asked me a question that nobody else has asked me.
Very cool. I like that.
So the Food Network used to have a huge internal production staff. They were always shooting one cooking show or another at the home studio in Chelsea Market in Manhattan. And at that time, there were many people full-time in the Food Network kitchens, ordering food for the shows, prepping it, developing recipes, polishing things out. So there was a full-time staff. At the same time, each show that they had there were certain freelancers they would bring in for different jobs. Every jar of pickles on the show has to have its own fake label made because they don't want to have a specific advertiser appear during the show in case these shows can run for 20 years. They may want to switch advertisers.
Right.
So they make these fake labels. So there's a little piece of the book, and someday I'm going to publish a whole thing about this. There's a huge staff that designs labels, that figures out what plates they're going to serve the food on, that cooks right behind the stage at exactly the same time, just in case there's a disaster and they need to swap something out on the fly. So there's both full-time staff and freelancers, but in the last couple of years, they fired their whole internal production staff, and they've been using production companies now, outside production companies, to make all of the content. So those are on a production by production basis. Who has the jobs? There are still some kitchen staff there because there's a lot of cookbooks, and they do still want to test some recipes and make sure that things are, working, but it's not what it was.
With the rise in popularity of vegan and vegetarian diets in America today, why hasn't the network come up with shows to cater to that demographic?
Are you reading my Twitter feed?
No, I'm not. By the way, give your Twitter handle out.
It's just Allen Salkin, at Allen Salkin, which is ALLEN, S like Sam, ALKIN. And also AllenSalkin.com is a website I have. But everyone always asks about why is there no vegan show, why are there no vegetarian shows, and the answer is the network is scared to try it because, and they even started the cooking channel, which was supposed to have more programming. It was a little grittier and more authentic. This network, which 20 years ago started in a world where nobody knew what kale or shallots was, has created an incredibly educated populace that knows a lot about food, and almost everybody has opinions about food and what they eat, what they don't eat, where it comes from, how far away from their house it is. And somehow, as we've gotten more sophisticated, the network seems to be getting dumber. Like I said, more hidden camera restaurant shows, and as you said, more competition shows, even though I think those do have a place and they can show some interesting ingredients. People want a vegetarian show. They want a vegan show. And why this network has only, at best, put on one or two specials in undesirable time slots shows they're afraid to lose one rating point tomorrow, even though down the line it could get them 10 rating points back.
Right. We're speaking with Allen Salkin, author of From Scratch, Inside the Food Network. One more question before I let you go, Allen. What is on the horizon for the network as we look towards the future? What can I expect in the next couple of years from the network?
I think one of two things could happen. There's always talk of somebody buying, the Food Network, or Scripps, which owns Food Network, and HGTV and travel. So let's say Discovery or Disney buys the Food Network. Then, and everything could change. They could just drastically reprogram the whole network. If that doesn't happen, I think the only way for them to go is to realize they're never probably going to be a top, sorry, I'm getting a Skype call. They're never going to be a top, 10 cable network in prime time, maybe again. I mean, they have their moments for sure, but they may just settle into being a nice, stable business, and they may start putting on more of those cooking shows that we all fell in love with, finding new appealing personalities, which they have to some extent with the Pioneer Woman, Ree Drummond, and even Trisha Yearwood's show, and some more cutting-edge shows, maybe, of the type that you're talking about. I don't know. That's when I write From Scratch Inside the Food Network, Book 2. Figure out what happened.
And Book 1 is available everywhere?
Yes, it is. Amazon and your local B&N, everything.
Sounds good. And when you write Book 2, we'll have you back on the program. How about that?
Sooner than that, I hope.
Allen, I want to thank you for joining us on the program. The book, From Scratch, Inside the Food Network. Big personalities, high drama, the extraordinary behind-the-scenes story. Allen, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
It's a treat, Mike. Thank you.
Take care. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. We'll be back right after this.